Human beings find it difficult to comprehend the reality of the divine design. And they imagine that if they're going to relinquish man's substitute patterns, that everything is going to go wrong, that there won't be anything right, that the rightness of things depends on man's substitute patterns. Even though we cannot immediately and clearly comprehend all of the factors involved in relationship to God's design, we do need to begin to realize that when the time comes, which is not yet, let that be clear, which is not yet, but when the time comes when the control begins to manifest from the standpoint of heaven on earth, the relinquishment of the man-made patterns of design will not produce chaos. For God's pattern is infinitely better. To clearly portray that better pattern is something that cannot be in all respects done at the present time. We can perhaps, as there is dedication and centering, begin to comprehend something of it, at least with respect to basic principle. But actually that is enough, because we are under the necessity of functioning on earth under these conditions. But these conditions make for us our problems and our opportunities. Now, who are those who will work together in the outworking of that divine plan? In the heavenly realms, the invisible realms, you can see how utterly futile it would be for us to even attempt to suggest an answer to that question. What is it that determines in heaven and will determine on earth when heaven is on earth, or when we let the kingdom of heaven that is at hand be on earth? We recognize that the God being, your Lord within you, is eternal and has eternal identity. Some people imagine that when the God being leaves the body, that God being, at the time of death, carries the identity of the human being, John Jones or something, and that being that left the body is John Jones in heaven, which is not the case. The human beings who have died do not exist anymore. Those patterns of identity are gone. They are gone. Where there was ascension, it was ascension out of the human identity into the eternal identity of the God being. Would we say that a God being has been living for millions and millions of years, just a segment of eternity? So it's more than that. But so we can comprehend something of it, a God being has been living for the past 10 million years, we will say, having a certain identity. The God being had that identity probably before that. Sometimes names do change, however, as patterns of focalization are changed. But for 10 million years, this God being, or Lord, focalization of deity, has had a specific identity. And now that God being comes along and incarnates in you. And your outer body has an identity that man gave it. Somebody thought real quick and tagged you with a tag when you were born. And that's your name. And then they suppose that when the body dies and the God being goes to heaven with whatever may ascend with it, that it takes along the identity of the human being. And they imagine that when they get to heaven, they're going to see a person of such and such an identity that they knew on earth. that human identity was left behind on earth. Always. Now, when the God being that is in you gets to heaven, that is, leaves this body, you think now with your outer mind, well, now I'll be looking for my mother, we'll say, or my father, or my uncle, or my aunt, or my friend, my husband, my child, or something. I'll be looking for little so-and-so, or I'll be looking for so-and-so. You won't. Because when you leave behind the limitations of this present body, you will know others by their identity, and you will be known by the identity that you have had for millions of years. And there will be no confusion about the identification that was established in this little span of time, this moment of eternity on earth. Because when you, in the inner sense, return to the invisible realms, you'll be known by the identity by which you've always been known. It will not be your present name. And you will not be looking for the identities of the people that you think that you'll be looking for, because you will know them all by their names that they've had for millions of years. And this little pattern of momentary identity that is used for convenience here on earth will not mean a thing. And you will know that one, male or female. Yes, it isn't that you won't know that person. I've heard people say, well, if I don't find my mother just like she was when I was on earth, when she was on earth, when I get to heaven, I don't want to go there. I'd rather go to hell. I've heard people actually say it. Well, they won't. But of course, what leaves the earth won't be bothered. What is bothered will go to hell. That is, to the grave. What is hell? Most of the words that are translated in the Bible as hell simply mean the grave. That's all. You go back and consider the words from which they were translated. Now, of course, there is a hell on earth, which some of you have noticed. But the hell under the earth is simply the grave and nothing more. The place where the dust returns to the earth and the identity is gone. For what returns to the earth must await the second resurrection, which is to say, the first resurrection takes place in the body while you live. And what isn't resurrected into the reality of deity during that period of time goes back into the earth, refuse day by day, or the refuse at the end of the lifespan. And then that refuse, whatever it may be, must be picked up by vegetation first. Until it is picked up by vegetation, it cannot begin the cycles of resurrection. Sometimes they seal these ashes or something in a lead vault, and they say, well, all of these little particles of dust are going to be there when Gabriel blows his horn, and he'll get this open, but these won't be scattered. He won't have to go looking for them all over the country. But, you see, Gabriel and his horn aren't going to be in the slightest bit interested in what's in that lead cask. So, the only way that substance that goes back into the earth can begin the cycle of resurrection is to be picked up by the vegetable kingdom, picked up out of the soil. And then it goes into the animal kingdom. Perhaps it's a blade of grass. You have a cow and the cow eats the grass. Maybe you get it when you drink a glass of milk. Maybe you decide to butcher the critter and eat the meat. One way or another, it finally gets resurrected up into somebody's human body. Now, in actual fact, you can't take a bite of food without helping to resurrect somebody's substance back along the way. Every day you're working in relationship to the second resurrection. Well, now it won't bother you when it comes mealtime. Think of all the purifying processes God inaugurated. It came up through the grass, how clean that is. Up through the vegetation, the garden down there is a wonderful spot for resurrection. Anyway, how many billions of human beings do you think have lived on Earth? You ever try to count them? There's some 2 billion now, and they're just here in the United States alone, a new baby's being born every 9 seconds. People are passing away almost at the same rate. All that going back into the soil. What was left with all of these billions and hundreds of billions is returned to the dust. And you share in the processes of the second resurrection. Until the substance is resurrected back into the human body, it can't have the chance to ascend in the sense of the God being again. So there must be a waiting for the second resurrection if the first is not a reality in the individual. Now, I've used this pattern to help impress on your consciousness and subconscious aspects of function the basic fact that the identities known here on earth do not control in heaven. And there isn't any need for marrying and giving in marriage in heaven, because that concept assumes that every being that goes into heaven is a new being somehow. There's a new soul, they say. Some suppose there are new souls and there are old souls. Have you ever heard people talk about young souls and old souls? And did you ever ask them where the souls came from? They can't tell you. They may have some fantastic idea or other, but it's rubbish. Just plain rubbish. No sense to it. It doesn't hold true to the patterns of being at all. Don't be confused with the issues of old souls or young souls. If you're going to use the word soul, mean fundamentally the human being. And if you mean that, well then, the baby's a new soul, and the older we get, the older we are as souls. Some of us are beginning to think we're old souls. But that which is in the body is not of this human pattern of concept. It is the reality of being, your own God being. And the vibrational patterns of relationship have long been established in heaven. If you belong in a certain pattern in heaven, when you leave this sphere of things, you'll be in that pattern, period. No matter who is your husband, wife, child, uncle, or something else here on earth. And you'll love it. And you think, well, I'd like to have some other pattern. You're trying to project a human concept into the realm of divine things where you don't know anything about it. You will have the right relationships there. Now, in the divine plan, those right relationships in heaven should manifest on earth. But man is so confused and is so thoroughly mixed up that it isn't once in 100 million times that you have, seemingly by chance perhaps, a right relationship on earth. We don't have right relationships on earth in this sense. Now, I'm not suggesting that everyone should rush out and get a divorce if you happen to be married. Not at all. Because you probably couldn't improve on the situation any. It might be worse. I'm simply pointing out something that is beyond the range of our present level of function. And to the degree, and here's the big promise for those especially who are the younger people, if they have what it takes, they can hold steady under the law and let the right pattern work out now. Because the very fact that you are on earth proves that the right pattern is on earth for you, if you would let it manifest. Now, human minds are inclined to jump to the conclusion then that means, under God's design, that if there is a woman, there must be one man for that woman and one woman for that man, and there it ends. That finishes it. But it doesn't. It's man's concept, man's belief, man's approach to the problem that assumes that from the standpoint of the divine design, marriage should mean just one man and one woman being together forever. Now that can open up some fields of questioning that I'd like to leave dormant for a while until you have some more expansion in consciousness, because we can't possibly, at this present point, examine all factors that are involved here. But we can trust that God's design is right. The point I am making is that from the standpoint of things in heaven, from the standpoint of things in God's design, the way it ought to be and the way it is where man hasn't been able to interfere with it, there are more female aspects of deity than there are male aspects of deity. Now, everyone has been inclined to suppose that if there was a female God being, there was a male God being. And that's the way it was, all the way up and down the line. But that is not the way it is. I am pointing out that there are vibrational patterns of being which the human mind as yet simply has not reached a point of comprehending.